Wait, you're a Bears fan and you're not subscribed to my channel? Before this video starts, make sure to 1. Hit the subscribe button below to catch all Bears content right here on this podcast. 2. Hit the bell notification because you, my friend, are a diehard Bears fan. And 3. Like this video and tell all the Bears fans you know about the channel. Alright, that's better. Now that you're actually subscribed to the channel, make sure to bear down and enjoy this video.
Now this is a podcast all about Bears. You either cheering for this team or just pulling your hair. I like to take a minute, just sit right back and tell you how I became the #1 Bears fan. That boy is Benny Hunter. Cake on the mic, cake on the mic, cake on the mic, cake on the mic. People, this the intro. Sacramento, California, born and raised. And Antelope is where I spend most of my days. Talk bad about my team, you must be a clown. This is Keek on the mic, so you know you better bear down. Bear down.
So, Bears fans, it has been about a week now since the Chicago Bears finally let go of Matt Nagy. And the Bears have begun interviewing head coaching candidates. And the reason why it has taken me so long to make a podcast on these coaching candidates because the Chicago Bears are actually interviewing a lot of different candidates. And at first, I was going to do a podcast video on every single one, but I'm like, when you're interviewing 9+ guys, it's really hard to do that. And I kind of have to give the McCaskies their props that they're actually taking their time on these candidates. They're not just going out there and hiring someone just to get the process over with. They're taking their time, they're being thorough, and they're trying to get the best candidate as possible, not only for the Chicago Bears, but hopefully for Justin Fields' development. The one thing I do have to say about the McCaskey family that kind of just cracks me up, and it's just such a McCaskey thing for them to do. Why in the world are we trying to hire a head coach before a GM? I know they're kind of going back and forth with these interviews with GMs and head coaches, but how can you do interviews with head coaches before you actually have a GM? That's just, to me, that's just such a McCaskey thing to do. So on today's episode of Keek on the Mic, I am going to rank the head coaching candidates that they are already interviewed or are planning to interview. So I'm going to do my least favorite to my favorite head coaching candidate that the Chicago Bears are planning to interview. So I think right now there is about 9 head coaching candidates that they're planning to interview. And the guys are Leslie Frazier, Dan Quinn, Matt Eberflus, the Colts defensive coordinator. We got Nathaniel Hackett, Todd Bowles, Brian Flores, Doug Peterson, Byron Leftwitz, and Brian Dable. They've already interviewed Brian Flores, I believe, and Doug Peterson for the head coaching candidates, but the rest of them are scheduled for a later date. So without further ado, I'm going to go through these guys, starting with my least favorite and going all the way down to my most favorite head coaching candidate, and I'm going to give you guys my opinion on each one of these guys. So starting out at number 9, I have Leslie Frazier, the Buffalo Bills defensive coordinator. Let me tell you, I don't want anything to do with Leslie Frazier. He is my least favorite head coaching candidate. I think he has a lot of experience. He has 20 years of NFL experience. Obviously, he had a stint with the Vikings from 2011 to 2013. He had a 21-32-1 record. And even though he was a defensive guru, I don't think the Vikings defense was that great when he was the head coach. And I think the Bears are only interviewing him because he was a part of that Super Bowl 1985 Chicago Bears team. So it would be a really, really cool press release thing saying, oh, the Bears hire X 1985 Chicago Bear. But other than that, this hire would be an underwhelming hire for the Chicago Bears franchise. And with all the defensive guys that we are interviewing, my question to them would be, what is your plan to develop Justin Fields? I wouldn't trust Leslie Frazier with Justin Fields' development. Who is your offensive coordinator going to be? Unless you have a really good offensive coordinator, I don't want anything to do with Leslie Frazier. He seems like he could be a decent coach, that leader of men that the McCaskies are looking for. But this would be my least favorite hire for the Chicago Bears. I hope they just interview him and then just move on. We do not need Leslie Frazier in Chicago. At number 8, we have Dan Quinn, the Cowboys defensive coordinator. Dan Quinn, we don't need you in Chicago, bro. Obviously, he started off hot in his stint with the Atlanta Falcons as a head coach, but then after the last couple of years with the Atlanta Falcons, it was very underwhelming. I think we've seen him as a head coach. He went 43-42. Obviously, he had that embarrassing Super Bowl loss, to Tom Brady, where he gave up that lead. But once again, he's a defensive guy. And to me, the defense is not the problem for the Chicago Bears. So unless you have a really good offensive coordinator, I don't want you. And this would be the same question to all the defensive guys that we are planning to interview. What is your plan to develop Justin Fields? That's the number one question that they need to be asking all these guys, but especially these defensive guys. Dan Quinn, great defensive mind. Who is your offensive coordinator? How are you going to develop Justin Fields? So this, to me, I wouldn't want Dan Quinn. Fortunately for the Chicago Bears, it's looking like Dan Quinn is going to end up being the Broncos head coach. So hopefully that happens before we interview him, possibly, because I don't want anything to do with Dan Quinn as well. And I feel like this would be a guy that the Chicago Bears and the McCaskey family would hire because, once again, he is that leader of men that they are looking for. Number 7, Matt Eberflus. Once again, it's a Colts defensive coordinator. He is kind of like a rising guy in terms of defensive coordinators. He has a lot of respect around the league. I know we had a couple of interviews last year, and he left some really good impressions from some of those interviews. But once again, I wouldn't trust him in the development of Justin Fields. I think the Colts defense has been really good for the last couple of years, so it would be a really positive thing for our defense with all these defense coordinators. I think they would have a lot to work with the Chicago Bears defense, right? But overall, who would be your offensive coordinator, and how would you develop Justin Fields? The Colts have a really good organization. So this guy, I'm not saying he would be a bad head coach. It's just not what the Chicago Bears are looking for, and especially when you have a young single caller trying to take that next step in year 2. At number 6, we have Nathaniel Hackett, the Green Bay Packers offensive coordinator. I don't want anything to do. This is the first offensive guy that I'm listing here. I don't want anything to do with Hackett. I just feel like it's Matt Nagy 2.0. And here's the only reason why I'm saying this. Matt LaFleur calls the plays in Green Bay. I don't really think that Nathaniel Hackett calls the plays. Not only do I not think Hackett calls the plays, you have Aaron Rodgers, a future Hall of Fame quarterback. You can do anything you want when you have a guy like Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, or Tom Brady. So, no, I don't want Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe he ends up being a good head coach elsewhere, but I don't want him in Chicago. And I know a lot of Bears fans were making jokes about the McCaskies actually interviewing Nathaniel Hackett, saying, well, if you can't beat him, start trying to take from Green Bay. Maybe he has the recipe to actually help us beat Green Bay. I highly doubt it. And I could be totally wrong on Nathaniel Hackett. Maybe he nails that interview. Maybe he has a great plan for Justin Fields. But my question to him is, do you actually call the plays in Green Bay? Because if you don't, it's Matt Nagy 2.0. Matt Nagy didn't call the plays in Kansas City. It was Andy Reid. So that would be my main question for Nathaniel Hackett, and he's at number 6. Number 5, I like this guy, Todd Bowles, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defensive coordinator. Todd Bowles did have a stint with the New York Jets. Didn't go very well, but at the same time, who does do well in New York, right? But what Todd Bowles has been able to do with that Buccaneers defense and how he was able to shut down a high-powered Kansas City, Patrick Mahomes-led offense in the Super Bowl made him look like nothing. That is really impressive. I would be intrigued to see what Todd Bowles would be able to do with the Chicago Bears defense. But once again, what is your plan to develop Justin Fields? Who is your offensive coordinator? If you had a good offensive coordinator to pair with Todd Bowles, I think this would be actually a pretty good hire for the Chicago Bears. Because Todd Bowles, with the right defensive personnel, which I feel like the Chicago Bears do have some pieces on this defense, this would probably be a good hire for the Chicago Bears. But I sound like a broken record when I keep saying this. Who is your offensive coordinator, and what is your plan to develop Justin Fields? At number 4, we have Brian Flores, the ex-Miami Dolphins head coach. I know everyone was saying it was just shocking that the Miami Dolphins actually let Brian Flores go. And, Miami is very dysfunctional. They have a very dysfunctional ownership. And yes, they're more dysfunctional than the Chicago Bears ownership. And that is crazy to think about in so many ways. But Brian Flores would be, to me, that sexy hire. He's a young head coach. He's a leader of men. He has everything that you would want and a head coach. I think he would have our defense playing at a high level. I think all the players would buy in. But once again, who's your offensive coordinator and what's your plan to develop Justin Fields? Brian Flores had the opportunity to develop Tua. It really didn't work out. I don't think Brian Flores wanted Tua. He kind of garnished Tua's confidence a little bit while he was in Miami. I wouldn't want that same thing to happen with Brian Flores. At the beginning, when I saw that Brian Flores actually got fired, he was one of my top candidates. I was like, oh, go out there and hire Brian Flores right away. But then I really started thinking about it, and I was like, yes, he's a good young head coach. But when I look back at this last season, the Miami Dolphins started out 1-7. They lost to the good teams, but then they started beating the teams that they were supposed to beat. Does that remind you of anybody? That reminds me just like Matt Nagy. He always beat the teams that he was supposed to beat, but lost to the good teams. And I'm not discrediting what Brian Flores was able to do in Miami. He led them to 2 straight winning seasons, and he had the Miami Dolphins playing really good football. And I don't know why the Dolphins moved on from Brian Flores. If Brian Flores ends up getting hired as the Chicago Bears head coach, I wouldn't be mad about this hire. I think, like I said, he's a great young head coach. But at the end of the day, what you did with Tua, you can't come over here and do that to Justin Fields, because Justin Fields is our future. He's our franchise single caller, and you have to be able to take him to the next level. And just because you're a defensive guy, it would still be on Brian Flores. If you hire him, bring in a good OC, and help Justin Fields get to the next level. At number 3, I have Doug Peterson, the ex-Eagles head coach. Obviously, Doug Peterson is known for the Super Bowl, and I guess if you do bring over to Chicago, you have Nick Foles as your backup still. Obviously, they have some chemistry. But when you look at Doug Peterson, he has dealt with a little bit of quarterback controversy, and you can't bring that over to Chicago. There's no quarterback controversy. Let's say we hire Doug Peterson, and he comes in and says, oh, there's an open quarterback competition between Nick Foles and Justin Fields. Man, get the hell out of there. There's no quarterback controversy. We need you to come in and help develop Justin Fields. And I think there is good and bad with Doug Peterson. I think he would be able to get Justin Fields to the next level, but then on the other hand, I'm not sure if him and Matt Nagy run the same scheme. I think their scheme is very similar. So what would you do different with Justin Fields, rather when you look at Matt Nagy's offense? What would you do differently? So I wouldn't be mad at the Doug Peterson hire, but obviously it wouldn't be my top choice. But there is rumors actually going around that Doug Peterson's interview didn't impress anybody in the panel. So I think Doug Peterson at this point is probably out as a Chicago Bears head coach in Canada. And I could be totally wrong, but I heard rumors that the interview didn't go as well as Peterson would hope it would. At number 2, we have Byron Leftwitz, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator. And there's a lot of Bears fans that want the Chicago Bears to hire Leftwitz. And why not? He's a young offensive coordinator. Obviously, when you look at him, he has Tom Brady. But I think his offense would probably work with Justin Fields. I think he would be able to get Justin Fields to the next level because Byron Leftwitz was a pretty decent quarterback when he played for the Jacksonville Jaguars years ago. So I think his scheme, even though some people are saying, well, yeah, he does have Tom Brady. And I think the same thing, like I mentioned earlier in the podcast. Yeah, Nathaniel Hackett. He has Aaron Rodgers. I think this is a little bit different because Byron Leftwitz actually calls the plays in Tampa Bay. And this one intrigues me a lot. I think if we were able to bring Byron Leftwitz to Chicago, I think he would really help Justin Fields get to the next level. I'm not sure why he would want to leave Tampa Bay right now. Of course, you have Tom Brady. Every time you have Tom Brady, you have a chance to win the Super Bowl. But just like my dad mentioned before this podcast, well, son, Tom Brady's not going to be there forever. So obviously he needs to get out eventually. But then my argument to that is, well, damn, I thought Tom Brady was going to retire about 5 years ago, and the man just keeps going. So who knows when Tom Brady's actually going to retire from the NFL. But I think this would be an outstanding hire for the Chicago Bears and for Justin Fields' development. And last but not least, my number 1 guy on my list. And this is another Chicago Bear fan favorite, and that is Brian Dable, the Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator. His resume is ridiculous. He has coached with Nick Saban. He has coached under Bill Belichick, where he won 5 Super Bowls there. Then he goes to Buffalo, right? And let's remind you that Josh Allen did not look good his rookie year. He was able to craft, an MVP caliber quarterback in Josh Allen. And now every single year, Josh Allen has the capability to be in the MVP conversation thanks to Brian Dable. This is my guy. If the resume doesn't impress you, just look what he did with Josh Allen. And I think he would be able to do the same thing with Justin Fields. A lot of people would sit here and say, and this is my main concern too, well, he runs Josh Allen way too much, which is true, right? You can't do that with Justin Fields. Josh Allen's a lot bigger quarterback. He can take those hits. Justin Fields can't take those hits. Obviously, he gets hit. He may get hurt. He already dealt with a couple injuries this season. So obviously, he can't come to Chicago and run all over the place with Justin Fields because it just wouldn't work. But the good news for bringing Dable over is that the Chicago Bears have a lot of good running backs. So David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, Tariq Cohen coming back, right? So he would have a lot of good weapons here in Chicago, especially in the running back room to work with. So this one gets me excited, guys. If we get Brian Dable, that would make me so happy because I feel like he can take Justin Fields to the next level. I think it would be bigger than what he was able to do with Josh Allen, because I do feel like Justin Fields offers so much raw talent that he would be able to work with and get him to that next level. And a lot of Bears fans, this is like the running joke right now, is that Brian Dable is the chubby version of Matt Nagy, which it's kind of funny, but when you really look at him, it's definitely true. So obviously these are the 9 guys that are set up for interviews to be the next Chicago Bears head coach. But now I want to offer you guys some other candidates that I hope they interview. Will it happen? I'm not sure. So the list that I have here for the other candidates that I hope they interview is Josh McDaniels, the Patriots offensive coordinator, Greg Roman, Ravens offensive coordinator, Eric Bieniemy, the Chiefs OC, Kellen Moore, the Cowboys OC, Ryan Day, the Ohio State head coach, and then, of course, it's just throwing it out there, Jim Harbaugh, the Michigan head coach, which at this point, I think Jim Harbaugh will stay put in Michigan. So for me, and I'm just going to state this right now before I end the podcast, if Jim Harbaugh wants to come to Chicago, he is my top guy, and then Dable would go to number 2. I'm not sure if everyone agrees with me on that statement, but if Jim Harbaugh wants to come to Chicago, he would be my top choice. But at this point, I think Jim Harbaugh was just kind of using the Bears situation to maybe earn more money at Michigan. So, like always, guys, let me know who you guys want to hire as the next Chicago Bears head coach, and who is your favorite candidate. Just give me a list of 3. Maybe you can give me one person. And who is your least favorite candidate? A candidate that you don't want the Chicago Bears to hire. Let me know down below in the comment section. But before I let you go, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the bell notification to catch all Bears content right here on the podcast. Make sure you follow me on all my social media channels, and make sure you share this episode of KIEQ on the Mic with every single Bears fan that you know. But other than that, I'll be back for an all-new Bears podcast right here on KIEQ on the Mic. Thanks, guys, and bear down.
You ain't bout it, you ain't bout it, you ain't KIEQ on the mic. You ain't bout it, you ain't bout it, you ain't KIEQ on the mic. You can go and subscribe, cause I be on it right.